Yeah, we're ready. All right. Good evening and welcome to the June 27th workshop on the housing study implementation. We'll turn it right over to city staff.
Excellent. Well, thank you, everybody, for coming here tonight. Really, this is kind of we're moving on to the next phase of our implementation of our housing study. Everybody has a copy of our housing study here. It was adopted in March of 2022, so we're a year into it, and we have a lot completed. But right now, we are, the purpose of today's workshop is really to look for guidance on the next efforts, that city staff should be starting with. So we have some staff members here, just to help assist, answer questions. Kelly Nyforth, Community Development Director. We have Mark Lyons, our Planning Manager. We also have Kay Qualley, the Assistant Community Development Director, and Jeff Whitty, who is our Principal Planner that focuses on housing. So really, we have all the staff members here that focus on housing. So appreciate everybody coming today. I wanted to put an agenda in front of us so we kind of stay on focus. Our goal today is really we want to be focusing on how can we attract affordable workforce housing. We know that we need lots of different types of housing, but we have seen an uptick and an increase in multifamily, and then looking at other ways to potentially increase housing opportunities with our existing housing stock. So today we really want to focus on what can we do, what solutions could we implement to attract workforce housing, that the average person making 80% to 120% of the median income, what could they afford? Like I said, we have the agenda to keep us on track here, so we're done at 1:45 before council. I just wanted to briefly go over the housing continuum. This is just a reminder that there in people's lives, no matter if you are a lower income or if you're a very higher income, your housing needs are going to change throughout your life. And when we created and adopted this plan, we wanted to make sure that we had recommendations and solutions to try to fill all of those gaps in the housing continuum that we have here in Oshkosh. So that's going to be a big, effort that we're going to continue on as we implement this. But today we are really looking at that affordable home ownership, even maybe affordable rentals. We really want to make sure that families that are moving to the area, that are in the area, that either have housing options to potentially move up to a larger home or that might be more expensive, or if they're moving to the area, there's options. So today that is going to be the focus of the conversation. In the adapted housing study, we have this figure here that shows where the gaps are in housing, dependent on the income ranges. Now, what the figure that was in this study that I have for you, it has been updated with more recent numbers, and that's what I have up here. So you do see that we still have a very big gap for the low income housing. That's folks that are making $0 to $25,000 a year. And then it does show a surplus in folks that maybe make $25,000 to $75,000 per year, and then $75,000 and up, it's showing that gap again. And really what we're talking about today is falling between that $75,000 to $150,000 range right now for that affordable housing. Wanted to talk a little bit about our existing program funding that we have to implement our housing programs. Right now we use a lot of the Healthy Neighborhood Initiative funds, and if you don't know, that is state statutes lets us keep our existing tax incremental districts open for one additional year, and all that increment that is created in that year, we get to use that for affordable housing activities. So Oshkosh was really a leader back in, I believe it was 2013, 2014, and we had some tax incremental districts to number 7, to number 8, to number 9 and 3 that were closing. And it was after it was implemented by the state that we were allowed to do this. And we are one of the first leaders in the state that said, okay, we're going to extend them for a year, and we're taking an increment, and we're going to create this program called the Healthy Neighborhood Initiative. And that really set up the city very well. It was to the tune of over almost $6 million, $5.5 million, to kind of have that nest egg to be able to allow us to start those housing programs, to help support staff, administration, to implement the programs, and to support either at one time NeighborWorks, and then as we move further down the Greater Oshkosh Healthy Neighborhood Initiative, Go HNI, who we've all heard of. So that is the main source of our funding. And we also have some community development block grant funds that we are able to allocate. We are a lot more strict with those funds, but we do use those funds as much as possible. And last year, for the 2023 CIP budget, council did approve $200,000 for CIP borrowing to implement the housing study, which we are very grateful of. But the problem is the funding from the Healthy Neighborhood Initiative is running out. And that's something that we do need to talk about today, because if we want to continue to implement all the programs you see here on the boards and do more, what we're going to talk about later, we are going to have to figure out about ways to fund it. Staff has some ideas, but this is something that we do want you to be aware of. Staff, do you have any comments on that before we keep moving forward?
No, just for council, some of the things from the CIP CIP borrowing that was approved last year. So we are working on one house replacement that was a unique project that came up that we can fund partially through block grant dollars, but then partially through our CIP borrowing. Very unique project that doesn't come around very often, but it was a nice opportunity for us. During the prior workshop, one of the things we had discussed was that that lookbook, or those house plans, to help show people what can be built from affordability standpoint on small lots, city-owned infill lots. So we are working through the process of completing that lookbook, or that design book, to help people understand what can they build on these lots, as well as really price it out so they know what it costs to build some of these styles of housing. What we found is it really helps people to see the numbers. This is
Right.
what I can do for my budget. It's
Yeah.
just some of the stuff we're working on with that CAP dollars from last year.
And, running out of money, it's good and bad. It's a good problem because we've had more and more people utilize our funds as years have gone by. We just had a presentation this January. We had over 100 people at the convention center wanting to learn about our programs. So we're going to talk about that a little bit too, where almost this year we're only halfway through the money in some programs where we allocated a certain amount of funds. They're running out, so we're going to have to look at maybe some other programs that we're going to have to move money around.
Yeah, that's the great point. Thanks for bringing up. For the first time ever, our housing program has become so successful, we started to run out of money earlier in the year. Early years of our Go H&I programming, money lasted the entire year. Last year, for the first time, at the very end of the year, we ran out of money. This year, we're not even halfway through, and we've had to pause some of the programs we operate because there was so much interest that money was already allocated and spent.
Yeah.
So it's a good thing and a bad thing.
And we've had the same amount allocated each year?
Correct. Similar amount.
Similar amount. It kind of bounces around. This year, and we budgeted about just over $1 million. That's also including revenue that we get when people, if their houses sell, then we get paid. The loan gets paid back. But roughly, it's been growing every year. But then what's been spent every year has been growing too. So that's kind of one of the issues that we'll talk about, where what we're looking to do from our side, how to kind of protect this money and stretch it out longer.
The one thing especially for the new council members, the Healthy Neighborhood Initiative, those are just one-time funds when a TIF closes. And so some of our largest TIFs of all time closed in 2013-14. That's why we took advantage of that program. So those funds have been getting drawn down because some of those funds have been used for lack of a better term, operating costs, like Go HNI. The loan repayments that Kelly referred to are really more under the CDBG program. So when the CDBG funds get repaid, they get recycled back into our our fund for other purposes.
Yeah, and we get funds paid back, loans paid back through our healthy neighborhood funds too, because we do loan out there too if they don't meet the qualifications for the CDBG.
So just, it's 970K a year, right? Not total? Is that what that number on
That was just
No,
nine-
that's just roughly for this year what we budgeted for total. I didn't include the revenue that we also have coming in because we kind of just, I just wanted to put, what we have for expenses going out.
But that was just 2023.
Yeah.
Roughly, what's the fund balance in that fund? That's kind of what I would want to
Yeah.
get to that point.
You have it sub 2 million.
Right now, our fund balance is probably,
1.8.
just looking at this, well, that's 2024. So my guess is it's just about 3 million. So what we have been doing in here, I know this is hard to see, but in your packet, we've been looking at projections saying, okay, if the admin is this much or this much a year, and we have, this many costs, this is kind of worst case scenario up here. And you can see in the red, we're gonna run out of money in 26. So then the next one, I did $50,000 a year for admin, so we're decreasing it quite a bit. But then I took off about $100,000 and $200,000 out of like our program funding. And as you can see, it stretches it out a little bit longer, especially if we do 500,000. It does stretch it out with some of the other TIDs that are closing in the next 10 years. But at the same time, now we're reducing our funding, and then that leaves, for Go H&I, we give $100,000 a year. They did fundraise $70,000 last year from private funders, but typically we have been the main funder of them. So that's something that I have concerns about too, that how can we continue to fund Go H&I, fund all these programs that are becoming more and more successful, and then at the same time, keep implementing, these different items here that we have in our housing study. So that's kind of what we're trying to do, and we are trying to get creative and look for other grant programs through the Wisconsin DOA, through HUD, anywhere we can go. There's even one at WIDA right now that we're looking at, but it is difficult. But for us, we really want to plan just to see kind of, what we're dealing with, just to give you the best information we can also. So with that, I think that let's go forward and talk about what have we implemented. We have done quite a bit, and you've all been a part of that as you've had approvals at council that you've had to consider. Mark, do you want to talk a little bit about some of these items?
Yeah, so since our kind of previous workshop and the direction I given to council, we proceeded with updating our zoning code. Just some of the highlights of that is we reduced minimum parking to make it easier for multifamily development, reduced minimum lot size, so you can potentially have a little bit more density in the city. And then the big ones, we allowed ADUs and duplexes in basically all of our residential zoning districts. Again, creating a density increase, which kind of drives affordability down a little bit. That's been successful so far. We're working with a number of individuals looking at ADUs. We've done a duplex or two since that time. So that's been very successful. Part of the housing study was also the recommendation that we reevaluate these same housing programs we're talking about today. We did reduce the number of programs. We looked at some of the ones that were not as successful and did remove them or kind of wrap them into maybe some other programs instead of funding them separately. It also recommended that we increase the amount of the loan, do more loans at less dollars, more dollars, less numbers, because the impact wasn't there kind of in the dollars we had. It was capped at 30,000, just based on current economic conditions with costs and everything. Just people weren't able to have the benefit they were looking for out of that. So we upped it to $50,000 per loan for a number of our programs, but again, then adversely doing less loans per year because of that. And then, as I mentioned earlier, we are working on that infill lot design book as part of the CAP request. And then really, I think something that was new and challenging for us is we began working again, with a community-based development organization in NeighborWorks as a kind of project team where they're coming in and looking at its potential options to do more housing in the city of Oshkosh on a project-by-project basis. Something a little different from maybe working with neighborhoods in the past is we're not giving them any type of stipend or anything. We're really just trying to show them lots and opportunities in the city. We say, hey, look at this house or look at this lot. Maybe this is a project that works for you on what you guys do. So not necessarily, helping them from an operational standpoint or anything, or just presenting opportunities to them to develop some housing in Oshkosh.
All right. So, does anybody have any questions with anything we've done so far? If,
Sorry, you said the info lot design books, they're in process, or when do you expect those to be?
So right now we're getting ready. We're actually issuing an RFP for architects to help design the final products. So right now we're in the process of getting that RFP out, probably going out here in July, with the goal of having then the RFP issued, consultant selected, potentially using more than one, just so we get a variety of designs, make sure that enough community groups have a chance to apply for it, with goal of really having it try to be wrapped up here by the end of the year.
so just wanted to kind of touch base a little bit. We talk about home affordability in Oshkosh. So when people think affordable housing, it's kind of it's a loaded word. People think of a lot of different things, but really it's anybody in any income range when your rent or mortgage utilities is no more of 30%, than your gross income. So we do have different income tiers here in Winnebago County. The income tiers that you see here on the screen, those are created by the federal government. So that's Winnebago County. So that's including all the Neenah, town of Algoma, all of the surrounding communities. They look at maybe for $94,000, could be two people that have income that are related. So a lot of times it's based on a family of four. But you can see the different tiers that they have all the way up from upper income all the way down to extremely low income. And you can kind of see the different types of housing that those different tiers potentially would need, from market rate housing to workforce housing, affordable housing again, and then supportive services. And I just want to make sure that everybody fully understands the distinction between all of those tiers. And then this is actually specific numbers for the Neenah Menasha MSA, Winnebago County. And if you're one person in a family, one income owner, or one person with one income, you're considered very low income if you make $31,000 or less. So it just kind of shows you what those income levels are and then the numbers that they apply towards it. So when we talk about some of our low-income housing, affordable housing projects, such as Smith School here in Oshkosh, that's 80%. So, that could be somebody that is one person, somebody maybe just graduated from technical school or college that's making $50,000 or less. So I think it kind of just puts it into perspective that low income, it's not really as low as we think it is. It's almost, in some situations, it's like average. So with that, we're going to drill down a little bit deeper. We're looking specifically at the city of Oshkosh median income, and this is calculated just within the city of Oshkosh boundaries, and it's one person. So it could be just one person that's living alone, or they're on a fixed income, and that average is just over $54,000. So what we wanted to do is show new homes and how much, in theory they could afford. So we even were a little conservative when we said, okay, 2.5 times your, usually that's 30%, but we just did 2.5 times your salary. So that's just under $136,000 house. But then what we did is we divided that, what the average cost is per square foot to build. And so they could build or buy a 600 square foot home. So it really puts it into perspective that the average person in the city making just the average amount of money, 50% below them, 50% above them, it is very difficult to buy homes here in the city of Oshkosh. And this is just a kind of a sampling of homes that are for sale, new homes that are for sale in our subdivisions right now, and then some that have recently been sold this past year or late 2022. And you can see they're all kind of in line between $216 per square foot all the way up to $241. And it does show how difficult it is to afford some of these new homes. And this is kind of what we're getting to with the challenges we're seeing. You want to talk?
If I could just really, and one of the reasons we took a peek at new homes and workforce is because in doing the housing study, one thing we found is that what is typically considered that workforce entry-level housing is your older housing stock that turns over from generation to generation. The housing study indicates right now people are aging in place approximately 10 years longer than they used to. So you're not having that turnover in workforce housing as rapidly as maybe we did in previous generations. So there's still a demand for that workforce housing for people, but there's no new capacity being added because you can't build new workforce and people are still staying there. That's partly why we're looking at, okay, what are some options for workforce housing to get workforce housing into the city, because we know it's a growing demand and there's just no stock in it right now.
And I would also point out, I think staff is trying to illustrate the depths of the issue, because we're not recommending 604 square foot houses. It's just that that's all you could afford if you wanted to build a brand new house with that income. So it just gives you, the reality is that's not realistic. The next scenario is affording somebody on an average income isn't going to be able to afford a full-size house either. So it kind of illustrates the narrow confines in which we're working on this stuff.
So the next thing we want to talk about is what it costs to develop a home. Now, this breakdown was from a presentation that Mark and I both attended, but when we matched the numbers up compared to the city's subdivision developments, the numbers are actually pretty close to online. Now, we're not going to talk too much about the actual home cost, but looking at the land cost for acquisition, for infrastructure costs, engineering and fees, you're looking at over $60,000 just to get that lot ready. And then you're building the home. So that is something that we have been hearing quite a bit from developers on, just the struggle to how, to make it feasible for them to build new subdivisions. How can we potentially help with this? We've talked about a lot of different scenarios, and we have a couple ideas here that we want to talk about. But as you see, we did some digging in just some subdivisions here in Oshkosh, and right now, the developers have to pay for 100% of the costs. So they have to pay for everything up front, for city infrastructure, for the roads, for everything to get that lot ready. Some communities do deferred assessments where they do, maybe it's a gravel road and the city comes in and paves it, and then they assess that property owner, that new home owner. The city of Oshkosh does not do it that way. It's really a mixed bag throughout the northeast Wisconsin area, what different communities do. But like I said, we have been getting quite a few requests for financial assistance of some sort to make these projects go forward. So we are looking at two different subdivisions up here that have had two different phases. Now, the difference between the 2017 and 2019 one compared to the 2018 and 2022, the 2017 and 2019, that's Casey's Meadow, that's Chet Wiesenberg. He didn't have as much upfront costs when he's been doing his different phases, and he also has quite a few relationships, I think, with contractors, so I think that's a big reason why his costs are lower. Where 2018 and 2022, those was the Pickard Estates, and they had to do quite a bit of utility work in 9th Ave and then into the site, and they were kind of fairly new at the game too. So I think that's kind of part of the reason, but neither of them had land acquisition costs because that was both in their family. So that's kind of a distinction between developers that are in the city, from the city, compared to folks that we've been talking to who want to come to Oshkosh, but it's cost prohibitive. And this is just kind of another overview of just the costs going up over time. You can kind of see 2005 starting here to the left all the way to 2022, and some costs have kind of remained high, but you can just see in general there is a shift going up. So their costs just to develop the homes for the materials and everything has been going up higher too.
Yeah, this really illustrates, starting after 19 is really when the cost increases start to explode. And you can see for a lot of the sanitary water stuff, there was some variation year to year, but the costs, since 2019 have really started to go up for them.
So what were the cities up against? Other communities are doing TIF assistance if it works within the parameters and the state statutes. They're doing city-built subdivisions where the city is basically the developer and then either sells or gives the lots away for free. There's cities that are installing infrastructure. Cities are purchasing the land, holding it, and then sometimes giving it to the developer. And then what I mentioned before is the property owners are paying more assessments rather than the developer fronting 100%. And then there's just other incentives to developers to complete, a certain amount of lots by a certain time. So the developers have not been too shy, to share this information with us, what other communities are doing. So it's something that, we've been reviewing and just to see what the different options are out there. And then we talk a lot about subdivisions, but we cannot forget infill development. The city's RDA has been very strategic with acquiring infill lots, and then some situations reactive with certain houses that just need to come down. This is one that we have between 8th and 9th Ave in Nebraska and Oregon, and where the yellow dots are, the RDA actually owns those properties, so you can see we own half the block. But we haven't had much movement on it, and sometimes, there's lower costs for infill development because they don't have to pay for all those utilities, but sometimes the lot is maybe a little bit more restrictive, and that might be challenging, and then sometimes the location also. So now we're looking at solutions, and this is really where we want to gather input from council, because it's something that I think we have some interest from community partners that might be interested in helping the city or being a partner with the city to try to accomplish, some of our goals that we have in our study. Going back to the infill housing, city staff would really like to look at targeting certain areas, perhaps, where we could acquire homes or acquire vacant lots and potentially put larger pieces of properties together. Or if there's just an area where it makes sense, like between maybe two new schools perhaps, where we know that it'll be maybe a little bit more attractive place to live, can we help really promote that and push that along? So we are looking at, we work with the county, we look on the MLS, we work with our friends down in inspections if they're houses that have a lot of code violations. So we really want to get some feedback and then obviously share that with RDA is where do we want to see that infill development? Is it just pick them off as you can, or should there be targeted areas that we should be looking at? Does anybody have any thoughts on that?
I'd like them to be targeted. I mean, especially I think if you get at the cost issue, it's probably more so, I think you mentioned location is a huge deal. If you're in parts of our city core that are traditionally not super wealthy areas, house values are kind of low. If you put a new home in, you're automatically upside down once you try to sell it.
Right.
So you've put in $300,000 to build a home, and there's no way you're going to get $300,000 in our city core. I live there. So.
And we know that's a struggle too. So the city has been offering more subsidies. There's a grant if you build on RDA lots, just to try to entice them. And then a lot of times each project's different, but if it's a low income person that's maybe moving in, we could offer them a CDBG down payment assistance or something. So we try to piece each project together and look at that capital stack, how we can make it work. So go
It's
ahead.
also why we're doing the design book.
Sure.
To make sure that if we're gonna do infill housing, especially in our older areas, the homes that we're kind of showing people can build are appropriate in scale, size, and as economically as possible. Obviously, new construction is always gonna be more expensive, but trying the best to show that, what can you build that meets the neighborhood, that is not gonna be adding a $400,000 house to a $100,000 neighborhood. Obviously, that's never gonna work. That's one of the goals we have of that project, is to try to show people what could be built that is as close to matching the neighborhood as we can.
Right.
Do you envision, is that a booklet you give to citizens, or is that a developer?
Yes to everything. We're actually copying it. The city of Green Bay has it.
True.
And it's just this really nice tool because sometimes, folks will look at a lot and it's hard for them to visualize what you could build there. And we can do a lot of due diligence to make sure it meets code and stormwater and make sure it meets the character as the neighborhood like Mark was talking about. And I think we actually are gonna go as far as to try to price it out too for people. So they can have that number in their head too.
And I think one of the reasons we're looking at doing it is we've had some success already doing it, even though the book is not finished. We have a special RDA meeting tomorrow night that's looking at a number of lots throughout the city that individuals want to buy. One of the individuals looking at purchasing some of those lots took a concept and design from Jeff Whitty, our housing planner, that found and said, this is kind of what we're talking about, showed it to them. They're taking that and running with it and going, okay, now I get what I could put on these lots that is workforce housing, has a potential ADU to help offset the costs, but still matches the neighborhood. And that was, Jeff just did that by finding some stuff to show them, here's some options. We're thinking taking that one step farther could even be more successful.
It's kind of the equivalent, it's the infill equivalent of going to a suburban housing development, and they show you all these different profiles of homes you can choose from, and the builder will do these ones for you. We do this in an infill method, and they know it's gonna be working, same way a suburban developer has been doing it for years. We're gonna make it work on an infill basis, which I thought was really very creative on the part of staff.
Right.
And it sounds like you guys have interest, though. That's yeah. Okay. Good.
Yeah, the RDA agenda, there's a
Tomorrow.
handful
Yep.
of what, about a half dozen of them?
Yep. Yeah.
I was gonna ask, so do you think it'll be more efficient for staff time if you have targeted areas you're really looking at? Or do you think, because it's not, looking at everywhere in the city at once versus being like, here, this is really, really focusing, is that the goal for it?
Yeah, I mean, there's gonna be certain situations where maybe a lot of times, sometimes people just say, city, will you take my house? The house needs to be raised. There'll be certain circumstances, or else if there's a really nice vacant lot in one of our neighborhood associations that we think would be, be great for a house. But typically, if we could have a targeted area, that could, I think, really help staff really narrow in and, focus on those areas and take a whole, wholesome look at it.
And it provides staff with some economies of scale because we can look at the specific neighborhood and then go to the book we're working on and say, okay, what of these houses can we help promote for infill in this neighborhood? Which of these are appropriate? When you're throughout the city, we kind of have to go out at each one, take a look. Is it a two-story neighborhood? Is it a single-family neighborhood? What is the predominant housing style and function? And then it takes a little more work. So a targeted area, we can kind of rein that in a little bit and help people a little faster.
Right. So, in light of time, we want to talk about subdivisions here. This is really the big one that we want to talk about. I mentioned earlier with the cost for developers, or else even in some situations, costs that may be on the backs of property owners. Is there anything that the city could do to help with this? We have had a few ideas. One was paving the streets. What if the city would take care of paving the streets in concrete? A lot of times, streets sit for, if it's native backfill that they put on streets, it sits for 3 years as gravel just to settle. So we could plan for that in our CIP and install the street, as part of our CIP and plan for it and design it. Buy vacant lots and subdivisions that have been vacant for multiple years and sell them or give them to developers to build homes. A developer actually did this on the south side of town on Isaac and Jacob Lane. There was a bunch of vacant lots. The utilities were in front, so it was much cheaper to buy those lots like that. Just all they had to do is build the homes, and they're widely, very, very successful. I think they were looking for more spots like that here in Oshkosh. The other one is kind of the big one that we really wanted to talk about today. Buy land and install infrastructure to develop a subdivision with entry-level homes that are affordable. This would need to be done with public-private partnerships. And really, staff sees this as a way to have greater involvement in controlling the costs for workforce housing. And the reason we're looking at that idea specifically is because when we had our workshop last year, we did hear from council when we talked a little bit about subdivision development that there was concerns that even if we would have some incentives for developers, would those cost savings go to the people buying the houses? Even if we did do the paving, would those cost savings, would that house be $20,000 less? The answer is I don't know. So really, the more control we have, the more we are able to really meet the goals that we have in our housing study, to have more affordable housing for workforce housing.
You know, we're seeing the single-family development that's taking place right now in Oshkosh is largely on that upper market end. It's those $400,000 plus houses. No one's really trying to fill a lower point in the market. And if that's going to be filled, is there an opportunity for the city to get involved? And if we want to ensure that that's the level of housing, that workforce housing, this potentially would be an opportunity to make sure that housing was at a workforce level, not just potentially provide an incentive and then whatever gets built there is really up to the builder.
Right.
And it goes back to that slide that talked about the lot cost. If we can find a way to lower the lot cost, because we don't have a magical way to lower the building cost, that's, the market is really gonna dictate
It is,
that.
yeah.
But if we can figure out a way to manipulate the infrastructure and the lot costs, can we do that? But of course, what are we willing to pay to do that? Because if we subsidize it, the money's gotta come from somewhere. But if we can find a way to hold it, and then the holding costs are absorbed by us, it's probably a little easier. But that's a very philosophical discussion that council needs to have on that topic.
So, oh, go ahead.
When you say public-private partnership, is that just the city and a developer? Is that what you mean?
No.
Or-
Is this like a Sheboygan model?
Good.
You're
Good.
getting warm.
Good segue. So let's talk about this example. This is one that's been in the news lately. Yeah.
We just created that slide when you said it.
So
It's really
the
cool.
Sheboygan County Economic Development Corporation, they have had a very, very proactive and successful workforce attraction kind of marketing plan for a long time. But what they came together is kind of the next step is to have housing for these people they're trying to attract. So they, it was working with the county, Sheboygan Falls, and then some public or some private businesses. So right now they have 11 acres in Sheboygan Falls, 54 homes ranging from 1,300 to 1,500 square feet. As you see, they're pretty decent, 3-bedroom, 2-bath, full basement, 2-car garage. Home prices will be less than $250,000. So $8 million was raised from 4 private companies, and then Sheboygan County pledged $2 million. Now I'll tell you that we already have partners in our community, nonprofit, public-private partners that are already learning more about this effort and would love to do something. So we wouldn't have brought this forward to you if we didn't think that we had some potential buy-in or interest from some of our community partners. Because this isn't something that the city can or probably should do alone. It really is going to have to be a community-wide effort where all of our goals, we're all collaborating together. So that is one example that's out there right now. I know that there's other municipalities that have created their own subdivisions. I just drove through one in Cross Plains this spring, I saw. There's some other ones I know that we've seen. So really, our goal is to just look for opportunities to whatever we can do for entry-level workforce housing. And we know that we need to invest in the initiative, but we also know that we need partners with it too. And I think we have some folks that are willing to listen. And the reason we want to do that, the price point can be controlled. And I think that's really our ultimate goal, is how can we make it affordable for people to actually purchase. And then we know that public assistance would directly benefit the homeowners. And then at the same time, if we were more in control of it, there would be greater transparency on how those public funds are being used. And then looking just to leverage other non-private business, private or government funds to achieve the goal together. Mark, did you have anything else to add to that one?
No, just we're looking, is there an opportunity here to capitalize on some of the stuff that's already growing in the community to actually directly benefit workforce housing?
Does anybody have any, I know it's a lot of information to throw at, but really what we would like to do today is get some feedback from counselors to see if this is something that we could study a little bit further and, see if what the feasibility is of this actually potentially coming together here in Oshkosh.
only question I had, and maybe you guys have explored this and it's not a possibility, is doing something like this, but on the infill sections, like pre-build the houses and try to sell those rather than having the homeowner having that on them to try to, like, you have the catalog, which is great. Looking at an empty lot, I can pick through, but like even working through to try to work with developers to get those pre-built, or especially if you target a section and have like, hey, this whole block is being redone here. They're going to be moving ready. It's the only idea that jumped out of me.
Yeah, and we have talked about, could we do like a smaller scale first? Just bite off a little bit. And we have a few areas in the city where we're like, okay, that'd be a nice little first, just dip our toes in to see if we could do this. But like I showed you that RDA block. I mean, we own half of the block already.
Right.
It's in bits and pieces, but we have a few other places that, maybe we could look at kind of being that developer, and it's more infill. It's not the, subdivision, but it could at least see if there's an interest.
And the only other, sorry,
No, you're good.
The only other idea I had is I know the tiny house village had a lot of buzz, and would there be a possibility of doing that for starting families that wouldn't be tied to income or anything, but to be a purchased option for people that wanted that as an option.
Yeah, and as part of some of the zoning implementation, we did decrease, the required lot size and house size, and got rid of some of those restrictions. So that's definitely an option if people are looking at tiny homes. That is something that they could do.
And we haven't kind of dove full into any of these options. We're kind of right now looking for direction to figure out, okay, where should we focus time and effort to bring you back more information on what's a feasible project.
Yeah, so I was just in the sake of time, I really like this idea. I think you guys should look into it more, especially if we have private partners that are willing to pony up some money. I think what Sheboygan did was super cool example, and they're well on their way, so we have a model we can kind of copy. I do like the idea of maybe making it infill, but if that's not in the cards, it sounds like, do you know how many lots you're shooting for at all? Is that, because
No.
Infill, you're maybe looking at only like a dozen, right?
Right.
If you're doing a subdivision,
Yep.
you can get that 50.
Right, yeah.
I do like deferred special assessments. I know some people don't super agree with them, but I think it's a way to, it's becoming the standard with cities. And if you're not doing it, your subdivision creation is going to lag. And I think we experienced that a little bit in Oshkosh. It's not a point to staff at all. You guys have done very well with the tools you've been given, but I think we need to have that subdivision growth, and that's part of it. So those are my takeaways.
Okay.
I think we can look for the right opportunities. I mean, Councilmember Buell mentioned tiny homes. Some groups may not be interested in that. One of the things that I was really intrigued about was, and it was that discussion about being compatible with the neighborhood. So some of these, you looked at the average price of a new house. Well, they were 1,800 square foot houses. You just do the math. It's times $224 a square foot. You multiply 1,800 by 224 or 1,200 by 224, you get a much bigger difference. So I think some of these infill lots represent an opportunity to be compatible with the neighborhood and make it more affordable. You don't go down to the tiny homes, but the tiny homes is 604 square feet, or 400 square feet is kind of where the tiny homes is. That's a niche that I don't know how many people are going to be interested in it. But if somebody walked in the door, would you want us to welcome that person and say, let's sit down and talk about it? Because it's some cases it's going to be, what are we willing to subsidize it for? Either subsidies through some of our funds or what the nonprofit philanthropic community is going to do. I talked to the mayor of Sheboygan Falls. Those 1,300 square foot homes, they're like, we've got them in Sheboygan Falls, so this is compatible with the rest of the city. So that they're welcoming those, and the mayor was like, I got on board because I saw this as a way to get it done quick, and he's taking advantage of all the enthusiasm that's going on. So if we can capture some enthusiasm, I think we got an opportunity to do some of these things. And I think the infill's one way.
Absolutely.
Yeah, if you find the right opportunity in the right subdivision, that you can, absolutely shoot for it. But I really like the idea that you said, trying a smaller scale project first and making sure it pans out.
in the interest of direction, I like the Sheboygan Falls, this program that they're trying out. I think it's very interesting. Lots of things for us to consider, because they're controlling the outcome is the biggest part for me. I get it on the business side. You know, if a developer has lower costs coming in, it ain't gonna change the output though. So anything we can do to control that, to create that, that value point, that'd be a good thing for us, I think.
And the one other thing to Councilmember Stevenson's point, we've talked about this on a number of occasions because, you know, we've lamented the fact that other communities are beating us to the punch on single-family housing because they offer this. I have a little bit of a moral dilemma, and I shared that with Joe. It's like, are they being forthcoming? Because what happens is you don't require the final paving. We special assess. We don't carry any cost per se until the special assessment happens. But then after 7 to 10 years, when you put in the streets, suddenly that homeowner gets a notice from the city. They don't get it from the developer. The developer's long gone. And they get this notice, well, we're finishing your street and here's a $10,000 assessment. And then some people didn't read the fine print when they were doing the closing on their house. And, well, where'd this come from? The developer said it was going to be taken care of. Well, being taken care of doesn't mean free. So it's that moral dilemma that we struggle with. But the reality is it's happening all around us.
And yeah, and I also just want to clarify, I don't think that's a solution for affordable housing.
Right.
I think that is, it's going to be your $400,000, your $500,000 home subdivision. So I think the other things you talked about is getting at that affordability.
Right, that makes sense. So,
Yeah, just, I guess, a couple of general thoughts, and this all looks pretty good. I think what we need to really do is focus on the dollar amounts on the low and the high side, and where we want to go. I mean, we see unfortunately, the reality of what a a 600 square foot home is. Do we really want to go there, like Mark was talking about? You know, once you get into the $250,000, $300,000 homes, I don't think we need to be concerned with that per se. So it's the homes that are, you know, between $100,000 and maybe $200,000 are the ones that we really need to focus on. And you know, I don't know where you guys are at as far as who you've talked to in regards to developers, but the reality here is, unless we heavily subsidize this from the city side, developers need to make money or they're not going to do anything. You can talk to them all day long, they're not going to do anything. So I really would love to hear what developers are saying about either this plan or a plan they have. You said that they're more than welcome to come in and tell you what other programs other cities are doing. I'd love to hear about that. State dollars on the state is how many billions of dollars in the green now? And they're always looking for ways to spend money. I think this is, whether it be Oshkosh or other communities, if this is something that we can lobby our representatives of coming up with a different program to help the state subsidize cities that are behind in these areas. I don't think anyone would have a problem with that. So I applaud the staff on the work that they've done, but I really want to, you know, I don't know if you have any plans on bringing some developers in to have a meeting, something similar to this, and we all know who they are, and they're all bright, smart people, and they've got great ideas. We've seen their work, so I would love to hear what they have to say.
sure. Yeah, no, I think that's definitely a step in the process that if we would gather that support from our public-private partners, we would start reaching out to those folks that, you know, may play that critical role in actually building the houses to see what it would take.
I think I would just add real super quick.
Yep.
I agree with what's been said. I think also for me thinking about knowing that we have almost half of our residents who are renters, kind of what's the plan with, you know, you mentioned there's an uptick in multifamily, Smith School, Cabrini, but how are we also facilitating kind of for lower income renters too?
Yeah, and that's always something, today, it wasn't as much of a focus, but that is something that, you know, first of all, if we have more housing options for maybe workforce housing, and hopefully they would leave the home maybe they're in, and there could kind of be a domino effect. That's always, as part of the housing continuum, there's always movement from the different areas wherever you are in your life. But that's also another public-private partnership, potentially different partners with that, but that is something that we have been talking to the county about, even some of the folks at the Oshkosh Kids Foundation with transitional housing, just to make sure that all folks, have the place to live that is affordable to them.
Yeah, I think we're gonna have subsequent discussions, because this was really on single-family owner-occupied housing today, but we can't forget about that. That whole continuum, you saw the gaps on the very low end. We weren't solving low-end issues today. We were talking about the medium to higher end issues. But we're not doing well in that regard either, so we gotta hit them both.
Yeah.
We do have an RFP out presently from the Redevelopment Authority on the Jefferson Street site. That is a site that has historically scored well for those type of housing projects. I think that deadline for applications coming in is in the next week or two
Yeah.
here, and then RDA will
Yeah.
be kind of looking at some of the potential options there. But that is one that is a potential option for getting another style of housing brought in at a different price point.
And to Councilmember Esslinger's point, the state did approve some new housing programs last week. I, for one, haven't had a chance to look at what the details are, but they're out there, and I think we're all learning about it. I think even the league was like, we've been so busy on shared revenue, we really haven't looked at it, but there's a lot of stuff in there, so we gotta do a little digging and see what's in there.
Yeah, workforce housing is a huge thing for the state, and we will do everything we can to take advantage of any funds they have. So, we'll look everywhere for that money. So, I understand, I know we're getting close to the end here, but I did just want to talk about long-term funding options, just to offset the decrease in healthy neighborhood funds. So we are really looking at ways that we can cut costs and use other funds to leverage our programs. We don't want to cut any, because they are very successful, and something staff has talked about doing is kind of looking on and doing like maybe a sampling of ROI. However, funds, that we have invested in some houses and some projects here in the city, how have their values gone up, and has it had a positive impact in the neighborhood that we do want. So that is something that we are looking at doing too, just to show that the funds are working, and I think it would be great to have more, that we can have more outreach. So I think we got, like I said, we really wanted just to get some feedback from counselors. I think for the most part, we did get quite a bit of feedback of kind of our next implementation efforts that we're going to look at pursuing. Obviously, we'll continue doing other, items in here, but we've been looking for some of the bigger ticket items that, we want to start with, and that, that workforce housing is kind of a big initiative right now. So I think right now would be a great time to take advantage of really looking to how we could potentially be a part of that game. Any final comments or questions?
Real quick, do you imagine, so these programs you're imagining going away in exchange for the things that we talked about previously? Is that the idea? Or is it
no.
in these? Okay.
Yep. I mean, we want to have programs that support all different types of housing, historical preservation, help with rental. If you have a rental, to help rehab it, to maybe bring it up to code.
I really like these programs.
Yeah.
That's why I just wanted
Yeah,
to clarify to make
absolutely.
sure. Okay.
Yeah.
This will keep, Councilmember Esslinger pointed out the 150 to 200,000.
Yep.
These programs will help keep those homes viable, and if somebody wants to move up, great, and then they can sell it at 150 to 200, where it hits the sweet spot for people who make the average income here in Oshkosh. We gotta do them all. It's just that these I don't envision going away. They might get tweaked,
Right.
like Kelly talked about, but we still have a lot more progress to go there.
Absolutely.
And
Really, with these, what
Yeah.
we wanted to bring up today was just the fact that the current funding method is not sustainable at the rate we are. To continue these programs, which we all want to do, something has to change from funding standpoint, programmatic structure standpoint. These have gotten so successful, we don't want to lose them, but we also can't sustain them in the same way we have up to this point.
I encourage council members to reach out to Mark and Kelly with any additional comments. I know our our comment portion was a little tight. We're running up against the 6 o'clock deadline, but reach out, provide additional feedback, questions. The topic's not going away, so appreciate your efforts.
Yeah,
We'll
thank you,
adjourn
everybody.
now and then get ready for council meeting in about 5 minutes. Thank you.
Great, thank you. Thank you.